Welcome again to Talking Australian Native Bees. Earlier this year, I recorded a series of interviews with 3 experienced Australian native beekeepers. As with all natural resources, you can never stop learning and expanding your best practices. I say no learning is lost learning when you're dealing with the care and maintenance of Australian native bees. Join me as I head south from the Sunshine Coast in search of more of that elusive information about our Australian native bees. You're probably wondering what I'm doing here on the north side of Brisbane in a suburban street and what it has to do with Australian native bees. Well, not far from here lives one of our South East Queensland experienced beekeepers, Greg Coonan. And Greg has written a fantastic book, a readable book on Australian native bees. So we're going to go and talk to him and find out a bit more about the book and also about some of his best practices in looking after Australian native bees. I might say that right after this, you've got a video timeline where you can go back and recap any of the sections we talk about. And also, it goes without saying, these are our experiences of looking after Australian native bees. They're not the definitive way, but they're a good place to start. So stay with us and we'll go and find Greg. Coonan, welcome to Talking with Australian Native Bees. Good to see you.
Good to see you as well, Glenn.
Mate, we've got a lot to cover today, but primarily I'd like to talk about your book, but also some of your basic practices in looking after Australian native bees. But let me say right off the top, congratulations on the book.
Thank you.
It's a fantastic read. It's simple, and I know there are other books out and about, but I think it's 64 pages long. And it really is, and I think I made the comment before, it's a readable book, deals with all of the basics, and it shows the passion that you've got for Australian native bees. But importantly, I think we've all got that passion, but what you've done is actually put it down on paper, which is fantastic. Why write a book?
Good question. I had to ask myself that same question. I think one of the things I really do enjoy is actually getting people started with keeping native bees and giving people the confidence to keep the native bees. And I just saw it as another way of getting people started, giving them the confidence to keep native bees, because they can be easy, they're always fun. It's just another contribution to the native bee community. I'm a bit of a stingless beeaholic, I think. So,
Aren't we all?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and as I say, the book is well illustrated as well. So you've had a lot of help with that as well.
Yeah, I've been really fortunate. Quite a few people that I've come in contact with the native bees, and people have helped to get into native bees have turned out to be really good photographers as well. There's some brilliant photos that been allowed to use by people. It's some of the illustrations in there I think are just outstanding. I wish I was as good a photographer as what they are.
Yeah. And I must say I'll certainly get you to sign the book that I've got as the author a bit later on. But let's deal with some of the aspects of the book. I mean, it's not in great detail, but it certainly gives a down-to-earth understanding of some of the practices.
Yeah, I suppose I did try to keep it simple. I'm constantly helping people with their native bees and their problems, getting people started. And I find I'm answering the same questions or being asked the same questions constantly. And I suppose I've got a good record up here of what people need to know about the bees and sort of putting it into a book to share it more widely. I'm really confident that with the first part of the book, dealing with just owning a hive and bring it into your yard, that it's really going to support people really well. I'm confident the hives will thrive if they do the things I'm suggesting. And it's just about getting them into their yards in the right positions and just knowing what's going to follow and just enjoy them.
Now you say getting started. How did Greg Coonan get started in Australian native bees?
A very good friend of mine, Steve Armstrong, gave me a little rescue hive one day, some about 10 years ago now. It was less than the size of your fist. It was the tiniest little rescue. Had a brood of about 50-cent piece, and it sat in the corner of a very big box, which was treated pine. So you sort of think, oh, nowadays I wouldn't put it in the same situation. It took about 2 years to grow up to about the size of a grapefruit. So it took a long time. After 3 years, it just bloomed. It turned into a very big hive, but by then I'd already secured, that was Carbonaria, I got a Hocking's Eye, I got myself an Australis, like so many people starting out, they just want to get
Yeah, they're a different bee.
Yeah, they are. A fun one. And I, like many people, I thought, oh, I can make my own boxes, I can design my own roofs, read everything I could find about native bees. John Clump's book was the book at the time, which was a really excellent book. The Aussie Bee website, wealth of information. I think I read everything that was on there. Probably typical of so many new starters.
Well, that's right. And I understand and have read in your book too, you make reference in some of that aspect of Tim Hurd's book as well, who's more scientific in the approach as well.
Oh yeah, Tim Hurd's the leader of the field obviously, and his book's just a marvellous book. Yeah. It's a great resource. I suppose I'm hoping I've complimented his stuff.
I'm sure you have. Yeah. So tell me, the book is available when?
By the end of January it'll be available. Still working out with the publishers where it's going to be going out from. I know it's going to be available from Amazon, and that'll be available in Australia and overseas as well through Amazon. We're just waiting to hear a little bit more detail about how it'll be supplied from other booksellers, other bookstores.
Now, I know you're at great pains to say you're a hobbyist of Australian native bees. I mean, there's plenty of commercialism about Australian native bees, but differentiate the two for me.
I think the hobbyist is part of the addiction. It's part of, I just want to enjoy myself and enjoy my native bees and enjoy people I'm interacting with. There's no greater joy really in seeing someone else get the thrill of a native beehive. It's just a whole lot of fun. It's my aim with it. Yes, I do sell the hives, so I'm a hobby business, but I don't want to be a big commercial operator. It's certainly not in my mind. I'll never do that. And if you look around my yard, and in the book there I talk about the hives I'd never sell, never part with. I've got some really unique hives which I love, and probably love showing people when they come to my yard to give them a look at all the different hives I've got. It's better than just looking at box after box, seeing the double hives and logs that I've got, that type of thing.
And what I understand, it's important from your perspective too to leave bees alone if they are in a good solid log hive?
Yeah, I certainly believe that. I'm really passionate about the log hives now. I've got a lot of good contacts with tree loppers and firewood cutters, so when they come across them doing their jobs, a lot of them bring them here, and I try to do them up in a way that they make really good garden features and too good for people who want to split them open, and in some ways too good to be abducted from, because their entrances when they're natural I think are just fantastic things, but I don't begrudge people who want to duck from them, because I've done it.
Yeah, I think we've all done it.
I've done it, yeah.
Or tried to do it, should I say.
Yeah, true.
So you also run Greg's Native Stingless Bee Facebook page.
Yes.
So you obviously get a lot of interaction from that page as well.
Yeah, I do get a lot of interactions there. I think it's brought to me a lot of younger people, younger families, I find. I think a lot of women as well. I'm pretty sure, particularly younger women. A lot of them have got young kids, they've got pets and dogs and chooks and that sort of stuff, and bringing a beehive into the yard is just another thing that they want to do, particularly during COVID, during the lockdown. So much invested in people's yards and their gardens. The bees now becomes just perfect complementary pets to have in the yard.
Sure. What I might do at this stage is just show the front cover of the book. As I have said before, beautifully illustrated, internal and externally, and that's available through Amazon.
It is definitely through Amazon, and I should have mentioned that covering photos by Jeff Dutton,
Yep.
one of the photographers. There's several of his photos in there, and they're all as beautiful as that one.
Now, is Jeff Dutton an Australian, a local, or is...
Yeah, he lives in Brisbane.
Oh, right.
I'm very keen about his native bees and his photography. He's got his own Facebook page,
Right.
Jeff Dutton Native Bees, with it, and there's photos like that one there all through his page. They're just great.
And I've certainly had a look at some of the photos additional to these that you've sent me, and some really good photography.
Yeah, they are.
All right, we'll make further mention of that at the end of the video to confirm where to buy and how to buy. But what we might do now is talk about some of the basic principles in looking after native bees and relate it to the book as well, but certainly find your way of treating our Australian native bees. Greg, let's talk a little bit about owning or looking after Australian native bees and knowing the bees in particular. How do they differ, like the Hawkins eye, let's say, to an Australis?
They're very similar actually to look at. The Australis are probably the easiest to distinguish from the other two because of their habit of putting a curtain up every night to secure their hive. Plus they're really delicate little flyers around the entrance. They hover around, whereas the Carbonara and Hawkins eye, they dart in and out. So they're distinguishing between those two is not a problem. The Carbonara and Hawkins eye, I think now with a keen eye I can pick the difference by looking at them by their difference in size. Hawkins eye is only about half a mil longer than the Carbonara, but I can see that now pretty reliably. Obviously if you can see the brood of the Hawkins eye or the Carbonara, you know instantly what type of bee you've got. So that's the most reliable way of picking the difference.
Which is the most robust to have here in South East Queensland? And I know that, I mean, we talk about some of our southern enthusiasts in Sydney and other places with Carbonara, but in particular South East Queensland, what is the bee to have in the backyard?
The Carbonara and the Hawkins eye will thrive in South East Queensland. They are both robust, they're tough little things with it. The Australis are a little bit more temperamental. They're a smaller hive, they don't have as many bees in there. But I've got several log hives of Australis here for quite a few years, and they just keep on doing their thing. They're quite strong. Yeah, I don't think it really matters too much. I know some people think the Australis are a little bit less comfortable near the coast where I am here.
Is it a heat thing with Australis?
Not really, it's probably more the humidity and the moisture. They're more a dry land bee. I've done rescues of Australis at Sanford, which is not too far inland, and one at Marumba Downs. So they naturally have come onto the coast in places, and yeah, they seem to do well. So all three, very, very easy to have in your yard in this part of the world.
Okay. Log hives. I mean, we've got hives that are either rescued or out of a log that is damaged, but is your view they should stay in a log hive as opposed to putting them in a brand new man-made box?
Well, I am very biased there. I love my log hives. I think they're beautiful in their own right, more beautiful than having a box. And I do everything possible to keep the hives in their natural home that they've come in. And it doesn't matter if it's in a log. I've got one outside down pot. I'm actually keeping them in a water meter box, put back in the ground. And when people ask me about hives they've got in various structures around their yards and that, my first thought is how can we keep them where they are? Or failing that, how can we keep them in whatever they've occupied, maybe by moving it to a safer place for them. So for me, a last resort is taking them out of whatever they're in, even a log hive that may be looking like it's a bit knocked around, a bit cracked and split. My aim would be to try to secure that log, because the bees are really tough. Unless they're completely opened up, if you can keep them secure, they will keep going.
Let's talk about materials. Now, we talked earlier about native bees housing themselves in the likes of pots and what's the best material, let's say in a man-made timber hive?
Well, I know there are a lot of different views on box designs and box timbers. I do use the hoop pine. It's a really good insulating timber. It's lightweight, it's easy to work with. But if failing that, the cypress pine a bit thicker because it's denser, so just to help with the insulation of your hive. And hardwood I'd probably leave to last. Some people love them and it's fine, but they are dense. They will conduct the heat in and out at the wrong times unless they're really thick. But the bees probably don't care.
Yeah. As long as it's a good place to live.
Yeah, as long as it's secure. If they can secure their chamber with it, they're happy.
And I noticed here in your combination of hives you have here at your property that you've even got a hive that's buried in the ground that was a water meter box and is still a water meter box with a hive thereabouts on top of it.
Yeah, the earth supplies a wonderful insulation factor for the hives, and that's why the water meters around this part of the world and other parts of Queensland are becoming the homes a lot of the time in suburbia for native bees.
Okay, let's move into the positioning and separation of hives. Once again, on your property you've got a fair amount of hives, and you know there's 2 or 3 metres thereabouts in between some of the log and boxes. Is there a fundamental positioning of a dimension that we need to look at when placing them in a group?
I always say to people when they're looking at placing a hive in the yard, you can't have too much shade in summer or too much sun in winter. And I usually say to people, look, if you've got a shady tree in the yard that you can put your hive under, put it on the northern side of that tree where the winter sun can come under, or put it on a north-facing veranda which has shade in summer and good winter sun. So positioning them is the most important thing about getting a hive to thrive in your yard. You get it in the right spot, it should be fine. If you want to keep multiple hives in your yard, I do try to keep the separation between my hives, and one of the easiest things you can do is to have a bush or a plant between the hives because it gives them a separate flight path. So the bees aren't bumping into each other and likely start squabbling because they think they're being invaded. Separate flight paths really are effective. And I do keep some of my daughter hives from reductions and sister hives from splits. I do keep them actually together. And some have been together for years and they've both been propagating new hives. Occasionally, when one of those needs to requeen and they get a drone swarm, the 2 hives really get stirred up by all the drones buzzing around, trying to stick their noses in, looking for a new
As males do.
As males do, and lots of them do. But you can end up with a bit of a squabble turning into a fight, and it won't stop if you don't intervene, and that just means you've got to move one of them away. It's not a hard thing to deal with, you just got to move one.
Hardwood hives. And I know I talked to Graham Sanders earlier in the year, and he's an advocate for hardwood hives, as well as I've also seen Graham with Besser blocks as hives. Your thoughts on that?
Look, it's horses for courses. If you're successful with that, like it sounds like he is, keep being successful with it. It's as long as you're it's all about insulation, and I think in Besser block they could be reasonable insulators, but they're still more important that whether they're in hardwood or Besser block or hoop pine, that going back to getting good shade in summer and warm winter sun. The Australis bees, if you don't give them winter sun, you'll almost invariably lose them, so they must have winter sun. The Hockins are a more tropical bee. They really love their winter sun for them to thrive. So it's more important actually to get them in the right position in the yard than what the material you're using.
And with the roof on.
And I like to put a roof on them, just to added insurance, and people are getting hives from me and putting them into their yards, and I don't know when they're trimming their trees up and opening them up to sun when they shouldn't have sun and that, so I do like to see a good roof on a hive, and I use the painted timber roof, hardwood ply with an air pocket underneath, and actually with the hoop pine boxes that we use here, that just extends the life of the hoop pine. It keeps the weather off them a lot better than anything else, and yeah, just that insulation factor.
And we spoke earlier that some of the rescues you do are for body corporate entities, and they would be in sometimes block walls and hard to access places as well.
Yeah, they can be in all manner of places, and some you cannot get to. They're under a concrete area or in a block wall of a building. There is no getting them out, and the best I can do is to try to reassure the body corporate, the people there, just how harmless they are. Try to tell them how lucky they are, and a lot of them do come to terms with that, so they can stay there.
And yet some of them you see out with pressure packs trying to maybe not have them in that block wall at that time.
Yeah, sometimes they do, and if you can't get them out, not much you can do other than try to convince people how lucky they are.
Greg, there's obviously core practices that are noted in other books and other people looking after Australian native bees, but what are the main core issues that you need to look at when handling and working with Australian native bees?
There's a few things that I would recommend to anyone actually working with native bees. When I say working with them, when they're propagating the hives, when they're doing rescues and they're honey harvesting, one of the things that I always say to people, particularly doing their first rescue or whatever it is, to do it when the bees aren't flying. So much easier if you can do it when they're not flying. You don't need a veil. You can really concentrate what you're doing. Now, I'll do all my rescues and splits in summer about 15 minutes before sunrise. So it's just not light enough for the bees to fly. They really do not get up in the air, so you can get in there and you get most of the bees from a rescue. Or if you're doing a split, you're not getting any bees in the air, and you're not getting many bees coming out of your hive, so that you really minimise your loss of bees from a split or a honey harvest, and you're maximising the bees you're getting when you're doing a rescue. You can get nearly all the bees doing it that way.
And is that applied to for, say, after 5, 6 in the afternoon or the evening?
Yeah, I find just that the extra warmth in the evening, the bees will still have a go at flying, and they tend to go off and seem to get lost. They're just that much more active when it's warmer, where the cooler it is, the easier it is to do it.
Okay. So that's number one?
Number one. The next one is getting your box set up for what you're doing, making sure your box is ready for splitting, making sure it's ready for doing a rescue, doing all the little things that will help you succeed in what you're doing. And there's quite a lot. I've gone through it in the book, obviously, with it. But if you do the things right with your box, you will increase your success rate quite a lot.
And you're a great advocate of inspection panels?
Inspection panels, to me, are a real asset. Whatever it is you're doing, whether it's splitting a hive, rescuing a hive, or doing adduction, for you to be able to see what is happening inside that box without disturbing your bees, it means so much to you and your time you spend and how successful you're going to be. You can take remedial action, when you've seen a rescue that's really going backwards, you can pick it very early in a piece. You can see if you've got a brood, a queen in residence, and whether there's new brood or if the hive is really going off and might need a bit of support from a mother hive eduction style. So that just makes it easier for the beekeeper doing that.
So in line with core practices, there's splitting and how to split and when to split. So let's just delve into the splitting side of it. Vertical split, horizontal split, are you an advocate of both ways?
I haven't gotten into the vertical splits. I've found the horizontal splits to be very easy and effective way of working with the bees, so I'm comfortable with that. The hive design is a standard oath style of design, which is designed for horizontal splitting. So that's the way I prefer to go. And I think the thing I'd always say to people if they're looking at splitting is you need to be very sure that your box is full. It's very easy to lose immature hives if you split them. You can lose one half very easily. You can actually lose both halves if they haven't got enough capacity in there to keep the hive functioning. Even more so if you're going into cool weather or very hot weather. You need fully occupied hive to be able to be successful, consistently successful.
And of course we're talking now about the splitting and making a new hive, but there's also a process of retrieving hives that may be a bit damaged or have lost their bees. And I'm intrigued to know whether, if there are any bees, and talking that they're the same species, if there are any bees residing still in the hive that's weak and it's connected to another hive that is fairly strong, what will happen to those bees that are inside that weak hive?
We are talking eduction techniques when you ask that question. I find that when a hive is getting weak and the numbers are starting to drop off, there's very little fight, if any, in those hives, and you can hook them up to a strong mother hive without a war breaking out. The mother hive seems to adopt that sort of box quite readily. In a couple of days you can get a few thousand bees will pour into that weaker hive and really give it a lot more grunt and get it really going for you.
Honey harvesting. Is there a proper time to harvest honey? And how much do you harvest and how long do you keep the top off?
Yeah, I think with honey harvesting, people first of all should say you don't have to harvest your honey. You don't have to split your hives, which is very different to owning honeybees because the diseases are virtually non-existent with them and they're very good at self-regulating their food supplies. You can actually leave your hive as is. Don't do it when you're splitting. Harvesting honey and splitting at the same time will often lead to the loss of the top half.
So it further weakens the hive?
Further weakens the hive, it makes it far more prone to slumping down, even with the slump bars. It leaves a lot of leaking honey because you've split through one layer, which is often where the brood is, not too bad. Take the honey super off and you've got a lot of honey in play, really dangerous. It does ruin the brood when you get honey on it. Obviously it's going to attract a lot of pests and it's prone to slumping. So it's just not good practice. I'd at least give a couple of months separation between harvesting honey and splitting a hive.
And also the clean-up is important too.
Yeah, you just got to make sure with whether you're doing rescues or splits or honey harvesting, you're not allowing honey leaks to get out of the hive. Clean up any honey leaks with a damp cloth, dry it off and tape all your joins. I tape every join when I'm working with the hive so that no baddies can get in and it does secure the hive for the bees.
Talking about baddies, pests.
Pests.
So tell me about pests. What should we steer clear of? Obviously taping hives is a good idea, but what else should we do?
Putting the propolis around the entry, which people are well aware of. I put it inside the entry hole so that the outside is easy to pen in. I put a bit of tape over it with a bit of fly screen over where the entry hole is so I can secure the hive that way to move them around. But putting the propolis on the inside, I only allow a 2 or 3 mil hole there, just a little nail hole through, so that even one bee can defend that hive just by blocking the hole. Because you'll If you've got any leaking honey, you'll get the pests certainly turning up for feed.
And tell me, that propolis, does it have to be from that hive, or can it be propolis from another hive?
It really doesn't matter where you get it from. You can use blue tack as well. What it's about is a defensive point.
Yep.
And if you use blue tack, you'll find the bees will reuse it because you'll see it in some of the structures in the hive down the track. Yep. But it's just to making sure they can helping your bees defend that entry.
Okay. What we've largely been talking about pertains to, let's say, from central Queensland down to the southeast corner. So are there any other practices that other people in other regions, the cooler or hotter regions, should be doing that are different to what we're talking about now, or is it really the same sort of thing?
Obviously, when you're getting into really cold climates, you've got some pretty important considerations about your temperature control in your hive. If your hive is full and mature or close to it, they are really good at managing temperatures. It's your smaller hives, your reductions, your smaller rescues that are really prone to weaknesses from temperature. I've not professed to be across everything that people in Sydney might be doing or what people in Warwick might be doing at Toowoomba. They've developed their knowledge and practices from a lot of experience, and I don't have that experience, so I'm certainly not going to advise on it. I observe what people are doing and interested, but my experiences are in the southeast area of Queensland in particular.
It's only my observation as a newbie of 12 months old into Australian native bees, but it would seem to me that the area, let's say, of around Ipswich, dry, warmer but colder in winter,
Yeah.
is more suited to any one or the other. I know that there are beekeepers out there with AAs, for instance. Is that a good climate for them?
Yeah, well, the AAs, that's a very natural climate for them across it's interior of Queensland as well. The AAs can really handle the 40-degree days better than any, but out around Ipswich, the Carbonaria are quite prevalent. The Hocking's eye are turning up in things like water meters because of the wonderful insulation the soil gives, so they can move out there, but Hocking's eye out there are much more difficult to look after, particularly the cold winters. Like, they are naturally a tropical bee, and you want to be giving them a whole lot of sun in winter and some insulation to help them along to get them through the winter. And the heat waves, well, they're tough on any of the hives out there if they're not fully mature. If they're smaller hives with a big space in their box, then the heat waves will take a terrible toll on any of the hives.
There's a lot of discussion about the internal size and volume of hives, 8 litres, 7 litres, and I know that there's obviously some scientific background to that, but I also see that in a lot, and even at your property with log hives here, they grow, the logs are long and the hives are long inside there as well, and we don't quite know in some cases what the literage is, and yet they're still thriving. So is it imperative, the literage of any of the hives?
Well, I've seen them in very small containers, little irrigation pits where we've got a Hocking's eye hive where it's nearly all brood, and they've been in there for years. They just keep going along. So, no, they can handle small spaces.
And where would they get their stores from?
Well, I think being in suburbia is like paradise, so there's year-round food supplies, so it gives them a lot more flexibility in our part of the world for that.
Yeah. Let's talk about rescues from water meters, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
Something you've really got to be careful with. You know, take it gently, take it easy. Is that your theory?
The rescues, if you do it right, they're not too hard. Some are very easy. You open a water meter box and you're going to see something different nearly every time. And sometimes the hive is a nice medium size, not too big, and it'll fit into a box very easily. I'll be, as I was saying, doing it when they're not flying. If I need to, I'll put a cold pack on top of the lid to get the bees down around their brood if it's really warm weather.
No harm to them?
No harm. No, I'm not going to leave it there indefinitely, just enough to get them away from the lid, so you're not going to lose any of those bees. One of the first things I do when I lifted the lid is I use a sharp knife, but I cut round the edges of the hive to quarantine the bees to their hive, because they will come running out even when they're not flying. They'll come pouring out. So getting the hive structure away from the edge of the box is really important. Sometimes you've got to cut around the meter itself depending where the brood is and the hive is. Then if I can, I'll get my hand underneath. If you touch the top of the hive where the brood and that is, you'll get hundreds of bees pouring out. They won't go back in, they'll be all over you. Get your hand underneath and lift and into a box, lid down, and you'll nearly get all the bees, and success is pretty likely doing that. Your really small hives, sometimes you get, and I said at the opening, I got given a hive by a good friend that had a brood about the size of 50-cent piece. They are really hard, but if you get the queen, when you take those and put them in a box, you nearly always succeed. But if you miss the queen or damage that queen, then you're a risk of failing. Mainly because I think, that my theory is that that little brood hasn't yet got queen cells. They're still supported by a mother hive, and this hive, all it needs are workers at that stage. They've got a young queen with it. So if you take her away, no support, you miss your queen, you got a little brood that's going to hatch out, and they'll do their best to make a hive, but without a queen and queen cells, that's not going to succeed. So with a viewing panel, you can pick that up fairly early in the piece, and if you hook them up induction style to a mother hive, they nearly always very quickly put a new queen in there for you, and they adopt it and turn it into a hive for you.
Brood lifts as part of productions. An advocate of that?
Yeah, I suppose I've tried everything with the native bees. I haven't done the vertical splits, but everything else I can think of to propagate the hives, and I've tried the completely natural eductions, and if you've got a very mature hive that hasn't had anything done to it for some years, invariably you get a very quick eduction, couple of months, and you got a hive out of it. Another way, but after that it can be quite slow, and might take you 12 months or longer. But if you add some brood from that same species to your eduction box, mother hive will invariably adopt it really quickly. Occasionally that doesn't produce a new queen, but it will produce a lot of structure, and occasionally you've got to put another bit of brood in there, and off it goes. It will flourish from there.
Hive movement. Once again, it's been well talked about, moving a hive and leaving it out there for a period. Is there a shorter period in your view that you can do that, or is there a better way of doing it?
This is after you've produced a new hive,
Correct,
that type of thing. Well, when you're splitting the hives, you can leave the two split hives together if you like, same yard. The only one I will move away is the one with the old bottom, with all the defences, not going to slump. I always put the one with the new bottom and the old at top in the original position, so any bees that have gotten out while you're splitting will end up back in the box that needs the most bees. It's got the worst defences, so getting the most bees back in that box is actually a good thing, and keeping both hives together in the yard somewhere, which means all the gatherers from that hive will finish up with the new bottom, is a really good result.
There are, say, 5 fundamental things that we should do as part of best practices in looking after native bees. Just take us through those 5.
The most important thing is getting the right position in the yard for your hive. That will set you up for a thriving hive, and that's the shade in summer and the sun in winter. You get that right and everything else sort of falls into place. When you're working with the bees, working when they're not flying, you don't need a veil, produces a better result. It's a lot easier on the bees and the person doing whatever they're doing. I think having the viewing panels has really improved our success rate in what we do, so just knowing what's going on. Using eduction techniques to revive weak hives, not losing hives, is another really good thing.
And finally, Greg, the best way for people who want to get involved in Australian native bees and either gain a hive or they have a hive and they want to know what to do, what's the best way to interact with you as a hobbyist? You do sell hives, but as a hobbyist and interacting with the general public in that area, how would you like people to interact with you?
For me, I really love working locally. It's a goal I have, I've always had. I really like helping people with their hives, but if I can do it hands-on when I need to, it makes a huge difference. If I can have local people come to my yard and I can show them the hives and show them where to set up and work through everything, it makes it so much easier for those people to get up and running, and it makes it more enjoyable for me. So I'm not wanting to be out there in the commercial world selling hives to everyone around, and I'm not wanting to become the universal advisor on bees. As I said, I don't know what people are doing in Sydney other than what I read.
Universal advisors?
Yeah, there's a few. Yeah, I love helping people. I wouldn't want to go beyond my capacity to do that.
Greg, finally, it's a great book. You can see your passion in the book for it. And as I said at the start, for someone not only to have that passion, and we all have that passion, but to then put that passion into black and white on pages in a book to be available for other people to look at, take in, and look after their bees, I think it's fantastic. Congratulations again, and thank you for talking to Australian native bees.
Thank you, Glenn. Much appreciated it.